Welcome to the 101st AirHacks TV. And because it's the 101st episode, what we can do from now is looking back exactly 100 episodes to the year, so time machine, to the year 2014. And this is April, the very first AirHacks TV episode. This was the April 2014. And the question is, what's really interesting, what were the questions, at least, 8 years ago, so more than 8 years ago. And Jeff said, okay, how you suggest convincing the ivory tower decision makers to leave plain old Tomcat and Spring in favor of Java EE 6 or 7? Interesting one, right? And the next is like the counter question. I mean, back then, now you will have to leave from Tomcat to Spring Boot, I would say, right now. So there is a migration possible. If you migrated back then to Java 6 or Java 7, now you could easily migrate to something like Helidon Quarkus, or you could just, just keep it running on Payara and move to Payara Cloud if you like. So Andreas asked the opposite. You should evaluate, do I need a Java EE monster? Scalability can be achieved at much lower price. What's interesting is, for me, Java EE was never about scalability, more about simplicity, I would say. There is nothing in Java EE about scalability, I would say. It's just like maybe thread pools is the only thing which Java EE supports for scalability. Anything else is about, how to call it, necessary plumbing, right? My thoughts on controversial 80 characters max width. Yeah, this was formatting back then. There was a huge discussion, about whether the code should be formatted within 80 characters. And I always said, okay, it should be wider than this. Fun enough, a few weeks ago, we had discussion exactly about that. And my opinion was, what I like is the Sun coding conventions or coding standards, how to format code. But these coding conventions, the only thing which I don't like is the 80 characters limit. No idea what the question was about Java fix in class path. But Alberto Gori asked, if this is true, I would say it's better to call EM clear just after EM flush. So I assume there was like, JPA consistency question. You state you are never designing your application by technical structures. Interesting. This was 8 years ago, and seems like back then I started already with boundary control entity pattern, and now he asked where to put exceptions. So in one of my current projects, we have, I think we even have a small exceptions or error handling folder or component, because in the spec there's a lots of exception stuff going on. So we have actually a dedicated error handling or exception folder because of the error handling functionality. But if you are speaking about Java exceptions, we keep the exceptions close to the business logic. And this is also a recurring question. And then this one is also number 7. Mr. Yasa asked testing an EGB injection. So EGB is like add inject. I got actually similar questions today about Quarkus testing. And Tim B asked, okay, if you have two microservices, REST and DTOs, how they communicate. So funny enough, also in one of my current projects, we're just using JSON objects to communicate without DTOs because more flexible. And Anonymous, number 9, asks, how one generates REST client stubs in Delphi for Java endpoints. There is still no widespread WSDL-like tools for REST. And I would say right now there's also no WSDL tool for Java anymore. And the conversation with Jean Boyarsky, and I think last year I had the opportunity to, there was an online session, so we had a chat about architecture with Gene, and Gene is pronounced correctly, I guess. And what I said back then, that ignore, or just also my opinion right now, ignore and disable should be is a defect. It should not be allowed. Okay, so this is the first time machine section in the AHEX TV 101, and next month we will take a look at the second edition, and I think it is interesting, right? Which questions we asked 8 years ago. Okay, now to the very first topic, and there is maybe this one. Which podcasts were released in the last few weeks? So the 8th July, there was a podcast about idempotency sequence and AWS, and this podcast is relevant one of the questions about storing secrets on AWS. So I will at least mention a tool used AWS Lambda Power Tools for Java, which I already opened. Another one is with OSGI Jürgen Albert, which who is I thought Jürgen is dangerous because he a master of Taekwondo, but it turns out this is what he does is more like traditional Taekwondo. This is more like kind of ballet or some. They are not allowed to touch the enemy. What I understood, and the entire fight is like a real fight, but without touching the other one. So then I, of course, lost respect in this podcast and asked harder questions because, yeah. But still, his Twitter avatar looks dangerous. Okay. Now, this was also interesting. This is with the fellow Carson Gross, a Java developer. This was actually unexpected. So there's a new framework library called HTMX, and this is like the maybe the RESTful way, not data APIs rather than resource-oriented clients. It's a small framework, and we had a chat how this framework happened, and Carson is a huge Java fanboy, and the entire idea is to promote Java with the JavaScript library, which I really appreciate. And Carson also tried to be minimalistic, no dependencies, and his JavaScript code looks like Java code. So this was an interesting one. And also Alejandro Pablo Revilla, interesting podcast about Pult of Sales, Java Pult of Sales, actually a framework which is hugely successful. It is used everywhere. And what's interesting about Alejandro, he does, he maintains the framework for a long time and still has fun with it. Was really nice and interesting discussion. And the very last one was with Goran, friend of the show, also AHEX alumni, about asynchronous AWS Lambda and maybe how to improve Lambda on AWS Cloud. So this were the so you don't have to listen to the podcast right now, so you already know what's inside, right? So we can save bandwidth and it's greener, So okay, now let's see. The very first question. Yeah, the history we already covered. And Mr. MKWAPISZ asked me, can you explain comment lack of consistent API tools? So this is almost a little bit negatively framed question, I would say, for testing Jakarta EE-based applications. And this is recurring questions. As you can see, 8 years ago, we get exactly the same question with EJB and lack of dependency injection. So I would say, I believe more than 8 years at least, because we know what my thinking was in the first episode of AHEX TV. I was very strict with the testing, and I do exactly the same right now. Actually, exactly before the show right now. So for me, there's not a lot difference between Jakarta EE microprofile. For me, it's the same Jakarta EE microprofile and Payara or Quarkus testing and plain Java testing. So how this? So what usually happens if you are building, let's say, microservices or microservice-like applications or monolith, I mean, something which has an HTTP API. So then I think the most important thing is to test the HTTP API. And so what I do is, for instance, I hope, yes, I opened already the Visual Studio Code, and there is a project called mockend. And I implemented a project as a utility to test web components. So what it is it mocks the backend, and it caches the data in a singleton and returns. So you can put a JSON string and ask for it again. So this makes testing easier. And I started with system test. So this is the entire system test. So I always have two modules. One module is the microservice module, and the other one is the system test module. And if I take a look at the module here, so this is empty, no dependencies. Why not? Because already back then, this is 16 months ago, there was already HTTP API. And the HTTP API is good enough to test a system test API. And is it convenient? I mean, I formatted a little bit strangely what I see right now. Let's see. Yeah, now it looks almost better. So I would say the HTTP API, this is what Java ships with. You don't need any external dependencies. So it's good enough. So in more, I would say, larger projects, what I tend to use, I use microprofile REST API. And the microprofile REST API, you can inject the microprofile if you have something like Quarkus, or you can just fetch the interfaces. And the cool story is, or how to call it, the useful part of this is, what you can do is you can put the interfaces in source main Java and keep the tests in source test Java. And then if you build a test, you get a well-tested the client API for free. So this is another option. What I'm going with it, this has nothing to do with Java EE, right? I could actually use the HTTP API and test ahex.live website or Google or whatever, right? So and then we get integration tests, and with the integration tests, most of the Jakarta EE APIs can be started without any additional tooling. You just start it and it works. So so the question is, how much tooling do we really need? And I get question of whether I'm using test containers, and the answer is usually not, because if you have a microservice project, I would say it just works without any additional stuff. So if you're using Quarkus, so you get additional support or Helidon, such as frameworks. In the Quarkus, you can put at QuarkusTest annotation on a test, and then you get full dependency injection. It behaves like the real Quarkus, which is nice. But again, system test, black box test is this, which is the most important thing. And actually, we start with system tests, and then we move backwards. So system test starts, then we write some integration tests, and then we write a unit test. Why? Because usually you're starting with the trivial stuff, and the most important thing is to see whether your API is working, and from there your business logic becomes more complex and more complex. So we write more unit tests. So in my Jakarta EE, there is a course from me. Let's see. AHEX.io. And there is Java 7 testing course. Is still somehow up to date. And I used I use CDI units and Archelion or whatever just to show you what you can use. But I have to admit, I don't use it a lot in my projects. I just keep it simple and stupid. And sometimes even if I see the test is very simple, I don't use the QuarkusTest either. I just use a simple JUnit test because it's a little bit faster. The Quarkus doesn't have to start. So Quarkus is very, very fast, but testing without Quarkus is even faster. Okay, if you like, take a look at the Java E7 testing course. And yeah, I hope. So, hello everybody. So, hello, and keep ask questions, right? Ask questions. It's not about hello here. This is hard work. Okay, you can ask questions on Twitter, as always, or in chat. So built-in chat. So now we have it. Let's take a look at the next question. So I don't know what the question is exactly about. So if you use Quarkus to get all the tests you would like to have, for instance don't like how Quarkus ships with REST assured. For instance, I never use REST assured. It's not necessary. I also not use at QuarkusTest. Also not necessary. And if you're asking me about Jakarta EE based, so also there is no test tools in the Jakarta EE spec because it is. I would say this is test is a little bit outside the portability, but it will be an interesting question whether now testing should be also standardized, so you can have pluggable annotations. Like there will be no QuarkusTest, like everyone could agree on an annotation called, let's say, at integration test, and then Quarkus Helidon and Piranha Cloud and all the others, we just use the annotation. Okay, this is, and now Mr. Amar Chair, Mr. Dempile, asked me, congratulations. So thank you for watching. 8 years. It's about concurrency. So, and what he says is there is one singleton EJB. Okay, if you have a singleton EJB, and so the question is, if you have at singleton EJB, and this is EJB, not Java X at inject EJB, and you have and you cause load on this EJB, so this at EJB singleton EJB, it locks actually the instance, so there will be only one transaction per instance. If you are using application scope, there is no locking at all. So the question is, show me the right way to implement this kind of architecture. So there is no right way, of course, but what you could do, externalizing this endpoint in a Quarkus microservice, this could be a valid way to introduce a microservice, because you say, I have one microservice which has a complete different runtime behavior than the remaining monolith, and maybe you can dedicate more threads, more memory, or change the networking or Java settings. Let's say if this were an AWS Lambda application, you can have run it with provision concurrency, and the others one just run it as it is. Or if this is a Fargate service or Docker container or OpenShift, or what have you, you could dedicate more memory to the container, or more CPUs, not memory, CPUs to the container than the remaining stuff. So I wouldn't go that far with introducing another microservice, because another microservice, you have to care about this, and But if you go to microprofile, so there is a spec, and the name of the spec is fault tolerance. And what's interesting, the fault tolerance ships with two interesting annotations. One is called asynchronous, hopefully asynchronous, and there's asynchronous one. So, and you can combine this asynchronous with bulkheads. So if you search for bulkhead, so there's another one. And if you combine asynchronous with bulkhead, you get a thread pool per method. This is what you can do, and this would be the right microprofile way to have one asynchronous method and dedicate more or a defined amount of resources to the method. Okay. Mostly it's not necessary. My question to you would be, why not just combine all the methods? I mean, is it really a problem? Yeah, this is the question. And I would just test it a little bit, because the right way means under heavy load something happens. As you can already say, is that with Apache Bench, I have experienced a complete stop of that specific endpoint. All the application is responding except this endpoint. And this is actually a very good sign. This would be the bulkhead. What it means is, in the bulkhead patterns, that all the threads dedicated to this endpoint are busy, which is a good thing, and the entire application is responsive. This was actually the entire trick back then by the application server. So they have a dedicated amount of threads for the admin console, and the remaining application server run with a different thread pool. So even if the server was saturated, you could access the admin console. So this was back then. Okay, do you ever do dependency inversion? So what dependency inversion means is, instead of being depending on implementations, you are using an interface which implements the implementation. So your client becomes no more dependent on the implementation; it only needs the interface. And do you ever do dependency inversion? Not without a reason. So if I would implement, so I would say in the recent projects, I cannot remember we implemented actually an interface. But if you would implement a product, then you have to do this. If I would implement JDBC API, I would just use it with interface. It would be crazy not to do so, right? And I actually forgot to look it up, how dependency inversion is defined. Dependency inversion principle. And Wikipedia is always right. Yeah, this is high-level modules should not import from low-level modules. This is what we did back then with interfaces, but it is too much work. So what we do right now is the BCE, me just allowing, that the @inject can inject implementations, and public methods is the interface. Abstraction should not depend on details. What I said right now, concrete implementation should depend on abstractions. Okay, and this is policy layer is depending on interface, and the implementation implements the interface, and you are not depending on the implementation. So I would say this is similar to strategy pattern, and this is where I would use, because in strategy pattern you would get 2 implementations of one interface, and you can swap between them. So it could be useful, but it was not useful enough in my recent projects, I have to say. I cannot even remember when I did it the last time. I think in my micro profile course I implemented a block engine, and I think somewhere there was a reason to use that, because the persistence is swappable, right? This would be a reason. So I would say if you would just use it all over the place, the dependency inversion, it would be a defect in my eyes in my project, because it means you are increasing the complexity without adding value to a regular project, right? So, dependency inversion is useful, yeah. But then don't name the implementations impl. So, and this was Mr. Karkilden, and now Paloliska. Quarkus REST app. We are thinking about replacing QuarkusTest with something which will work even if we remove Quarkus dependencies, like you did in video. What you would suggest? So the discussion, I wouldn't like to repeat, but because something we was testing. So even in Quarkus project, mock and WASA Quarkus projects, I didn't use QuarkusTest at all. I was only depending on Java 11. So this was the mock end. But in one of my current projects, we use QuarkusTest all over the place, and I don't have a bad feeling with it, because the only thing which this thing does is it makes to inject. So it makes the classes injectable. So the question is, how likely it is that you will move from Quarkus to somewhere else? And if you really have to move, I'm pretty sure you can replace QuarkusTest with something different in 2 days, maybe. This would be the risk, and I wouldn't do it right now because the risk is too low. So this would be my thing. And I forgot to look at the video, but let's see, what was it about? Where is the video? Reject all. Yeah. Okay. I thought this was an earlier video. In earlier video, what I did is I remove all the plugins from Quarkus, and it was curious what happens. But yeah, but what you would suggest, I would just say, okay, if you really need integration tests, go with QuarkusTests. For system tests, create another module, and you don't need QuarkusTest then. So this is what I'm suggesting. So the QuarkusTest is a very specific kind of testing where you are injecting internal stuff of the microservice, and this is integration test. So in the mockend case, is it the mockend? So I closed the mockends already, but here. So this is the mockend, and I don't believe there is any Quarkus test. No, there's also no unit test. It's just the endpoints. So this is the endpoints here. It's very simple. And what I could do, of course, I could write a Quarkus test and inject, let's say, the emitter here and test it. So this would be an integration test. But in the system tests here, in the another module, you can use Quarkus test, but this is less likely, so that you really have to in typical business project. Okay. So let's see what the chat does. Okay, so the Quarkus test also starts containers with database if used in projects, so it simplifies testing. This Pavel says. Under SS regarding test containers, how you do handle a database for local dev testing? Thanks. Okay, very good questions. Thank you, chat. So to Andre, I got the question also recently from my from the team, and we actually I don't like to do this. So in the cloud age, it is really simple to set up a account, and you can start the database and stop the database and automate everything. So what I did back then, I ran the databases in a Docker container. And I don't believe there are specific tools. So I have a small script which shuts down the database and restarts it. With Docker container, 2 lines of code. So I think it's okay. And with the test containers, by the way, there was a podcast about test containers. I would say the killer use case for test containers is if you need, a very or the somehow complex environment with all the dependencies, and they even thinking about moving it somewhere into the clouds. From every machine you have access to the same thing, so you can share the environment between developers. This could make sense. In my projects, what we try to do is, I think the principle number 1 is your development environment should not differ from the production environment. In the year 2022, right here, there is no need to make a difference between development and production environment. So I would say if you have access to cloud, create a database. I would say if you have something like DynamoDB, no issue at all. With Postgres, I would say 10 minutes you have here the database. If you use, for instance, on AWS serverless v2, I think you can test entire month for, I don't know, 10 euros. Or if it runs all the time, 40 euros is serverless with a half ACU, yeah, Aurora capacity unit. So, with tools like CDK or Pulumi, you can create the entire environment in minutes. So I would say we shouldn't try, to replicate a cloud or local machine, because what will kill us is not necessarily the database, but how you would test, for instance, security groups, firewalls, which always cause trouble. Security groups, I said already. The IAM roles, policies, roles. This is where actually the time is spent, not necessary, to emulate the cloud Postgres database on your local machine. And Pavel says QuarkusTest also starts containers with database. So it simplifies testing. I don't like that Quarkus starts a database, I have to admit. So what I would do is I would create a script again, which starts the database, let's say in a Docker. And Docker is not running. Actually, I would test you then. I have a script start Postgres in Docker, and this would start Postgres, and I'm immediately operational. So sometimes I try this out, but if the project is longer lasting, I create my own environment in the cloud or on a server somewhere, and this is matter of minutes or in worst case hours, but then we have repeatable environment. Okay, Daniel retracted the message which is said. So thank you for confirming. That's something the right way. Got the idea from you and Sebastian Daschner a year ago. It's perfect. So thank you, V4MPYYY. Very nice name. So I think we covered a lot of questions now. So let's go ahead. How if need to integrate a message broker like ActiveMQ or RabbitMQ on a Quarkus application, what is traditional way to it? Integrate to Quarkus. We integrated IBM message queue, which is as challenging as ActiveQ and RabbitMQ, and with Quarkus was not a problem at all. We just used the IBM MQ library and just we didn't use the managed way. We said, okay, it should behave like Java SE application, and this worked well. It just worked. We never tried the native compilation, the native image, but it worked out of the box. So I would just use ActiveMQ, RabbitMQ, whatever driver you have, write in Java SE unit test, see whether it works, and then integrate to Quarkus, and it also should work. What won't work is the native compilation. Daniel Kirsch says ephemeral testing environments in cloud. Daniel, is it a thing, what you said? Ephemeral testing environment is a new acronym, so I have to remember this, but this is what we use for years. And right now I use CDK Cloud Development Kit, Cloud Development Kit to do exactly this. So the entire environment can be set up in minutes. And what I have personally, I have multiple accounts. So I have like main account is the Adam Bean account, and then I have per client at least one account where the entire testing happens. And this is also maybe if you watched my sessions, there in the last years I speaking more and more about serverless environments, and the reason for that this is sometimes I forget to mention this. If you have a serverless environment, what you can have is you can have a fully production environment and shut it down and it costs you nothing, because if there is no request, there are no costs. This is why I think this is a huge advantage of serverless environments, because you can have, exactly the same environment in your account as you have in production. The only difference is, your Fargate your Fargate server does not run with 4 CPUs, maybe just a half CPU, but you can easily test with 4 because, that's the difference. Okay, Fernando. And then Mr. Vallon. Do you use BDD or Cucumber for testing? If yes, when would you recommend and not why? I'm never used Cucumber or behavior driven. This Cucumber is when then, right? This exactly. Given then. Forgot. Given when then or something like this. This is like Gherkin or Cucumber testing. Cucumber or BDD was actually written for or was meant to be used by the business department, and I cannot remember a case where business department wrote such tests. I actually remember one case, but I forgot the company. But usually, the business department is not interested to write such tests. And I'm not interested in to write the Cucumber test. And by the way, Cypress.io provides different style APIs, and what I always search for is the JUnit-like style because I prefer it over the BDD. But this is just my preference. What I also don't like back then, I remember you need specific Eclipse plugins to support the DSL, which is always suspicious a little bit. Okay. Small reactive messaging will force me to use REST Easy Reactive, right? No, because Fernando asked me, because I used small reactive messaging at least 2 years ago without REST Easy Reactive. Maybe now, it really depends. Given when then, exactly. Valon, thank you. Given when then, and this is somehow similar to Gurken. On Gurke in German is cucumber in English, and this is now we have the entire story. Thank you. So without chat, there will be no content on AirHacks. So now, where are we? QuarkusTest. Now, Anders, Mr. Joined GitHub this month. I think just because of AirHacks, right? This is the most challenging question. So I try to summarize this. By the way, maybe an improvement. What I usually do, let's see. We should introduce this. So I try to summarize your questions with one sentence. Maybe we should, from the next 102nd episode, I would expect, one sentence. This is like the header and then the question. So this is a little bit too long, but I think the gist or the summary of this is there is some user which can be injected like the principal, let's say Duke. And Anders would like to access the Duke and use the Duke name for filtering the queries. This is my understanding. And this is, by the way, what Java EE 7 was supposed to do. There was an idea to have Java EE 7 Cloud Edition, but it was delayed or in the last moment retracted. But what remained, the capability of Hibernate and what the other one? Forgotten. Hibernate, OpenJPA, the capability of having multi-tenant environments, and in the top link and Eclipse link. This was this one. I thought about top link, and this was Eclipse link. Eclipse link, OpenJPA, and Hibernate, and they were supposed to support multi-tenancy by adding a filter criteria to the query. This is similar requests. Having to write if conditions all over the place. It is surely possible. MongoDB is the problematic. There are lots of drivers, so it really depends on the driver. But what always works is request scoped is something like, so what request scoped actually means, usually there is a kind of a thread and you're storing the data in thread local. This would be what happens behind the scenes usually. And in one project, we had to pass the information who accesses the database, store it in the Oracle connection because of auditing purposes. And in this part, what we did, we stored the principal before it was called in thread local, and in the JDBC driver level, we fetched the data and I think it's called set connection info, as I remember. It was on the Oracle JDBC connection. And then the database knew who is calling the database. And you could do something similar. So you can store your data in request scope. You can store the context in thread local and access it later. So this will work, and you don't have if statements all over the place. So and if it's necessary, what you can also have like injectable context with the authentication data and current context and access it from everywhere. Okay, now, Mr. Oh, this is a friend of the show from Texas. He attended several recent AirHacks live sessions, and now he asked me, I need to understand what exact version is deployed to the target environment, dev and prod. One of the solutions could be the endpoint that returns the commit ID. How do you address this in your project? So in my current projects, I misused health check. And the health checks returns the relevant information, like, for instance, the build ID. And you can use the commit ID. What we do right now, the code pipeline sets the environment, and the microprofile application fetches the environment and returns to you. So this is what happens exactly in the current project. Thank you, Alexandra, and it was really nice to meet you in person at the AirHacks Live workshops. And speaking of AirHacks Live, there is somewhere an open tab. So we had already, this comes later. This is the AirHacks Live around the corner. So there is no time in the summer, unfortunately. So there will be 2 more editions of AirHacks Live. This is a serverless persistence for serverless Java. This is the newer one. And what's the idea here is just to speak about starting with Aurora serverless to DynamoDB and S3, and speaking about the differences NoSQL storage versus single table design and stuff like that. And the first was serverless event-driven architectures, but from the persistence perspective. So, something like Kinesis or Kafka and SNS, SQS, and Event Bridge. This is like events and persistence, and everything is serverless. So we also to talk how to pull connections or not to pull connections and stuff like that. Okay. So we also covered this. Dependency inversion, also covered. And I think we also covered all the questions here. And this is one of the remaining questions. So, okay. So I think, Alexander, you could use a dedicated version endpoint. And I tend to use the health check endpoint. And the reason being is it is usually also hidden. So the version info is accessible from outside. For instance, in Quarkus, the health check is behind the Q namespace, which is hidden or not accessible from outside. So then Mr. Yogu, this is Guber, I think Jochen maybe. Have you looked into something like sops for managing your secrets? Of course, I opened this and it looks interesting. So I will take a look at this. So this is what's interesting is this sops is from Mozilla. So interesting stuff. And if yes, how you integrate that with a Java application? I have looked at this, but I didn't use it. So this is the difference. We experiment with Terragram to mount the sops file into the environment. We really like to also manage our secrets in Git. Obviously, we can also store them in SSM. This is Secret Manager on AWS, and this is what I would prefer. The question is, if you already have SSM, and this is System Manager, not Secret Manager. This is the System Manager, and there is a sub. The name is AWS SSM System Manager, and there is one component called Parameter Store. Parameter Store. Okay. System Manager Parameter Store. This is what you need. Exactly. So, and the interesting part is the AWS System Manager Parameter Store is free and it supports encryption. And even better, if you have something like Fargate, it is fully integrated. So you can use System Manager Parameter Store, or you can use the Secret Manager, this AWS Secret Manager. And the Secret Manager is a JSON Secrets Manager. You store JSON. It costs 50 cents a month, one such a secret. The interesting part, rotation is supported. All the RDS databases are well integrated with it. DynamoDB is not integrated, but all the relational RDS is integrated. And Fargate has access to it as well. So the question is, if you have already this, why you would like to implement your own solution? So I would always prefer that. And I don't like the idea at all to store secrets in Git. So, and my personal, of course, everything is personal, right? My opinion about the clouds is, I would say, if you can, just use your on-premise servers, just stay on-premise. So it is cheaper, you can do whatever you like, and but not everything is possible, right? So the problem starts with this. So you get in the cloud, you get, the encryption standards, they are compliant, they are audited. You get secret rotation for free. You can, issue SSL certificates all the time. So it's way easier than on-premise. So easier means faster. So you can actually save money just by relying on the infrastructure. So what I'm saying, my personal opinion is either you stay on-premise and and use OpenShift, Rancher, and you can build. It is really reasonable to use Kubernetes-like environments on-premise. If you go to the cloud, so I would say go really to the cloud, and if you go to AWS, use whatever AWS gives you, and write simple code. So this would be if I'm on AWS, I don't try to abstract from AWS, and even if I would move from AWS to Azure, I would say if I implement my own abstraction, I'm really not sure. I think it is impossible to make the abstraction just work out of the box on Azure. So it would be easier to migrate my simple code from AWS to Azure than, not use the features and implement it by my own. So I would say I would use SSM parameter store or even the secret manager before I would use TerraGrant or sops. But having said that, I like the idea of sops, what I saw, and I will evaluate it, not for the cloud, maybe for, I don't know, password manager or whatever. So it's really interesting. So, hey, this is Johannes, by the way. Yeah, so my personal opinion is just use what the cloud offers you. This is the secret vault, I think, on Azure. And SSM parameter store is completely free. And I think string arrays or lists are supported, strings and secrets. You can encrypt secrets on SSM. And what you can also do on AWS, very simple. You can store JSON and S3 encrypted with your key and just use it with 2 lines of code in your code. So also possible. I thought we are like in half an hour done, but it was longer than expected. Was lots of fun again, so I will look at this. So it looks really interesting, and Mozilla is a nice company. So now, what's the deal? I would say thank you for watching. Enjoy the summer. And one question is, so the advantage of sops, you can actually version your secrets and integrate. Okay, you can version the secrets with Secret Manager. So this is actually even the annoying part, because if you're accessing the secret from the Secret Manager, you always have to say dot or colon current for the current version. And if you have a Secret Manager, you cannot really delete the secret. You can because it will take 2 weeks until it disappears. It's a little bit annoying with infrastructure as code, but the versioning is built in. And if you have S3 bucket, you can turn on versioning is also versioned. Terraforms, we have to speak about Terraform, because what we can achieve with CDK, I would say with 20 lines of code, you will need 2,000 lines of Terraform. But yeah, we had the same discussion with XML, and yeah, so they're really nice. But if the same, so the same is true if you have AWS, let's say, and you have CDK or even CloudFormation. So what's nice about CDK and CloudFormation, that the entire state is already maintained by AWS. So this is a killer feature, right? And the entire encryption and everything is already solved. So, and if I have a Terraform, I need first, to deal with that. Should I store it in S3 and DynamoDB where I store the state? Why to store the state of infrastructure as code? You have the problem of 2 developers. They have their own state on the local disk, and which won't work. So you need the state stored somewhere in a central place. And on Azure, I will use Bicep. This is the language of Azure. So, but this is a completely different story. So actually, you can then store the values into SSM, but you have it in your infrastructure as code setup. This is what I don't know, because if you have the certificate rotation and everything, you can actually, if you, let's say you have RDS database, right? RDS database would generate the secret for you, would store the secret in how it's called, Secret Manager. And the Fargate will just pick the Secret Manager, and there will be no reference in Terraform. So it's not necessary that you actually have to know the secrets in Terraform. Completely different discussion. I would say write a question or statement to the next AHEX TV 102nd in 4 weeks, and I would try to answer with it, or we can have a nice discussion again. I would say thank you a lot. Enjoy the summer, and see you next time.